Yes, good morning. How are you going?
I am very well. Now, you've got an interesting story about a remarkable horse-drawn drays that travelled through Ipswich 161 years ago.
Yes, that's right. This story comes from Ipswich, and it was a similar morning to this morning, 161 years ago. It was on Monday, the 4th of July, 1864, and the most extraordinary sight and sound occurred in the streets of Ipswich. It was in the morning. Two horse-drawn drays rolled through the streets. Ipswich people stood in silence, staring at what was carried in those drays, as the streets echoed with the sound of horse hooves, the turning of wooden wheels, and the unmistakable clinking of chains. You see, these were the chains attached to the legs of prisoners being transported through Ipswich. They were police prisoners being taken from Brisbane through Ipswich on their way to Toowoomba to face justice. And among them were some remarkable criminals and stories and things. Now, many of the criminals and many of these prisoners has been captured by Ipswich's own Senior Sergeant William Francis, who, of course, would become famous for catching bushrangers. I've told you about it before. He included, the people he caught included people like the man he thought was Captain Thunderbolt, who the magistrate released him only to be shot 3 months later by police. But one of the prisoners on the drays was Henry Dagg, who was charged with manslaughter. Now, Dagg would narrowly escape conviction because the only two witnesses against him were considered unreliable Germans. Now, Dagg disappeared north and died in Rockhampton, where, despite leaving his landlady a load of money, he never afforded the dignity of a headstone, even though he was innocent. Another prisoners on one of these drays was a 16-year-old bushranger named Alfred Allwood. Now, he grew up in the shadow of Captain Thunderbolt and would twice escape from prison, be recaptured after being tracked for 150 miles, and would see out his days on St. Helena Island. There was also the killer, Walter Powell. Powell was a stockman who was charged with murdering his head stockman, his boss. It was a remarkable case involving bigamy, adultery, poisoning, fraud, and, of course, murder. And Fowler would be found not guilty for his part because it was deemed justifiable homicide. Then there was John Livingston. Now, Livingston was famous as the imposter magistrate of Surat. He actually committed 2 men to trial for horse stealing while he fraudulently sat on the bench, swindled over £1 million, or $1 million these days, and shouted the whole town of Surat to champagne. So he's kind of a popular criminal. Another prisoner on those Ipswich drays was William Goldfinch. He was the accomplice of the bushranger John Burns, alias Riley the Bushranger, alias the Hairy Man, so called because he's invariably described as a very dirty man with a profusion of unkept hair over his face and trailing down his back. So I won't say that's like you, Danny, but you know what I mean. Now, the passenger on the drays that most people in Ipswich wanted to catch a glimpse of was the alleged murderer, Alexander Ritchie. Now, Ritchie had sensationally killed a station manager. 3 weeks after passing through Ipswich, Ritchie became the first person to hang in Toowoomba when he faced the government executioner in the then new Toowoomba jail. Now, all of these men who comprised the 2 dray loads of prisoners, they were passing through Ipswich en route to Toowoomba to face trial. Now, this was an historic journey because it was the last time in history that such a load of prisoners would pass through Ipswich. You see, Toowoomba jail had just been opened, and so the people of Ipswich would never need to witness the collection of unfortunates ever again, because no longer would prisoners first go from Toowoomba to Brisbane when on committal, and then be escorted back again to Toowoomba for trial. They would just stay in Toowoomba and await their fate there. And so since then, 1864, Ipswich would have, we had to make up our own street entertainment.
Well, what a good story that is. Mate, always good to chat, and we'll look forward to doing it again next week.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.